in terms of medicine, I actually think we're maybe 5 years too early. The whole industry is actually discussing personalization stuff, but I think it's a bit different to compare the 2000 or the teens basically, right, compared to the 20s. And I think in this day and age, or in this decade ultimately, innovation is actually moving much quicker and adoption is actually much quicker.
I'm joined by Luka Ivicevic, co-founder and CEO of Index Health, a MedTech startup that's raised $6 million to modernize medicine by making treatment personalized, data-driven, and proactive. Luka, thanks for your time today. I've got 5 questions for you. Are you ready for them?
Let's do it.
Your last startup was Penta, a digital banking platform for German SMEs that you started straight out of college. You raised over 80 million in venture capital and ultimately sold the company. What was it like seeing that kind of success at such a young age? Once you've built and sold a company, how does it affect your way of life? Having proven yourself and sitting on a sizable amount of money, I'd imagine that at the very least, you can breathe a little easier.
Sure. It sounds like it's an overnight success, or any venture really does. It takes a minimum of 5 years to build anything half meaningful. And in Penta's case, it took 5 years to raise a Series B, and ultimately 6 to get acquired from foundation. So it does take a while. So it's not like you wake up one day and the company's doing well and everything is perfect. So it's something that you actually just don't notice, and it just happens while it's happening. I guess that's the easiest way to describe it.
The US healthcare system is set up to incentivize solutions to symptoms rather than to address root causes. You witnessed this firsthand with your mother when she was experiencing chronic fatigue. She went from doctor to doctor, and they all focused on symptoms, ignoring underlying problems. It was only until you found a functional medicine doctor that took the time to interview her about lifestyle habits, diet, and exercise, and also commissioned numerous lab tests to get a fuller picture before eventually diagnosing her with an autoimmune disease. That functional approach is what inspired you to set Index Health into motion and embark on a journey to fill the healthcare void with data and personalization. MedTech is a complete 180 from fintech. Why did you think this was something you could take on?
Sure. With that story from my mom, ultimately with the hopping from doctor to doctor, getting more medication, nothing helping. The second doctors started using advanced lab tests with ultimately aggregating thousands of data points and ultimately taking a more scientific and personalized approach using data. I just thought to myself, why isn't all of medicine this data driven and personalized? And ultimately, why don't we approach cancer this way, or diabetes, or, child autism, for example? Like, why isn't all of medicine this scientific and data driven actually? And so, just given my tech/venture building background, I just thought that, looking in 10 years from now, what is the future of medicine for me is quite clear that it's much more data driven and personalized. And I set out to build it. So ultimately my goal is, how do you make this a standard of care for 1 billion people globally, in all touches and essentially senses of the meaning of healthcare.
You've mentioned being an outsider has worked to your advantage at both Penta and at Index Health. It allows you to bring fresh ideas without bias and to easily recognize how things could work differently. It's funny though, because you'll also often be told that you need to be well versed in your industry and to understand the depth of the problem you're trying to solve in order to build a robust solution. How do you balance those two dynamics? Is it as simple as having a co-founder that has the expertise that you lack?
Sure. So we didn't have a banker at Penta until maybe 10 or 15,000 customers. And so within the whole company, I think with banking, it's quite an easy learning curve, send money, receive money, compliance, AML. It's a relatively, I say, easy learning curve compared to medicine. With medicine, we had doctors and, medical doctors on the team from day one. So it's definitely it's always about the team that you have, whether it's banking or healthcare. And I would just basically say that the most important thing you could decide on and do is, who are you actually hiring and who's around you? And you should always have people who are much, much smarter than you are to ultimately join you and your team.
Index Health seems to have the right solution at the right time. Telemedicine is taking off. People are more concerned with their health coming out of a pandemic, and there's a growing need for functional healthcare. Timing is essential to a startup. How did you know that time was right to go all in on index? For people that want to be sure on whether they aren't too late or too early, how would they go about gauging that?
Sure. I think with Penta, we were right. We were that actually last challenger bank in Europe, at least to launch, that was successful to that magnitude. Um, so that's kind of like we were kind of the last one to board the train. And if obviously there's other examples, like let's say Vivid, which launched in I think 2018 or 2019. Um, but in general, it's kind of like we had a bit of a last mover advantage to some extent. But there wasn't any significant challenger bank built after that ultimately in Europe. In terms of medicine, I actually think we're maybe 5 years too early. The whole industry is actually discussing personalization stuff, but I think it's a bit different to compare the 2000 or the teens basically, right, compared to the 20s. And I think in this day and age, or in this decade ultimately, innovation is actually moving much quicker and adoption is actually much quicker. It's rare to be around a group of friends and not know something that's happening in the world, right? And so if you compare that to just maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and so I think that while we are 5 years early, that would have probably killed us 10 years ago. But in this case, I think it's just going to help us because the industry is ultimately moving there, and we'll have the infrastructure built to be able to scale it and ultimately, serve and help as many people as possible.
Product market fit. You've written on it before, and I think you're about to launch a podcast dedicated to the subject. What exactly does PMF mean to a startup? How do you go about finding it? And how do you know once you have it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, with that podcast, Product Market Fit Cafe, it's actually, we wanted to launch it just purely out of selfish reasons. Just, it's like learning from the best founders around us, some of which are our friends. And so we just thought, hey, if we're going to chat with these people, we might as well record it and, share it. And so what does product market fit mean for me? It's more, so I look at it as something very number oriented, where you have very stable CAC. And so that's kind of, it's a reoccurring CAC that, you can repeat, whether it's through organic channels or paid. And it's with a reasonable acquisition or payback period. So within 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, again, depending on the product, right? So that's kind of the first metric. Second metric is satisfaction. So the product market fit survey by Sean Ellis, how dissatisfied would you be if you couldn't use this product anymore? Or how satisfied, etc. And so ultimately, if it's very satisfied and above, that's kind of that 40% mark that you want to hit, or above 45%. And then other things are retention, right? Looking at retention, how long are you retaining customers compared to the lifetime, or the CAC LTV ratio, right? So it's looking at actually a mix of maybe 3 to 5 different metrics that are the most important for your business. That probably sounds super data driven and boring, but I don't see a better way to define it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that you have to consistently measure, right? It's not like a one and done thing.
Yeah. Exactly. On a monthly. So depends when you launched. I mean, if you're within 3 to 6 months of launch, then that's not enough data just to really say you have product market fit. 12 months and beyond is a good metric. Hence why Series A investors want more than just, initial growth spurt metrics.
Luka, appreciate your time. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave people with?
If you're building a company, speak to as many customers as you can and follow the numbers.